So maybe let's just give our audience a bit of an overview of how you see what's happening on the battlefront. We're seeing advancements on the Russian side, especially in the recent weeks, but they've been relatively minimal. There's, one could say, a stalemate there. Both sides are losing a lot of men, a lot of equipment.
That's all nonsense, Mario. Stop wasting my time. Stop lying to your audience. That's bullshit. Okay. The Russian losses have dropped to single digits. Think about that. 60, 90 days ago, they were double digits. Ukrainian losses are continuously horrific. So this is a nonsense that people are repeating on their way into this discussion with the Russians up in Alaska. You have no chance of coming to any sort of reasonable outcome when you have distortions on the strategic level of the kind that you've just outlined. That's absolutely false, completely wrong. Now, you're free to believe it, but I'm not going to sit here and listen to that nonsense because it's just not true. Now, you want to know what's going to happen? If Donald Trump walks into this meeting with the distorted view that you have just outlined, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. And I don't think Donald Trump privately believes anything that you've just said. I think he knows the truth. He's repeating this narrative spun up in London, New York City, and Washington because he thinks he has to, because he's got donors, because he's got globalist European governments in London and Paris and Berlin who keep repeating this nonsense. And he feels he has to maintain that fiction. But when he sits down at the table, the truth is very, very stark. Ukraine is falling apart. It's crumbling. The Russians aren't inching forward at 1,000 meters a day. They're finishing off what is left of the Ukrainian army. We have always focused on territory. The focus of the Russians has never been territory. It has been the annihilation of the Ukrainian military threat and the government in Kiev. Well, the Ukrainian military threat is just about gone. The best that they can do right now is beg, borrow, and steal whatever missiles the Germans, the French, or the British will provide to them, and then hurl them into Russia in the hopes that this will convey the impression in the West that somehow or another they're still alive and well. They're not. It's over militarily. Done. The war is ending. The question is, what do we want to do about it? That's really the issue. Now, I'm sorry to interrupt you about this, but I deal with this all the time. And Mario, I'm just sick of the lies.
So I did hear your last interview. You said the same thing. It's hard to verify, on the Russian side, they don't release many numbers. On the Ukrainian side, obviously, they're going to be very biased. British intelligence are saying 1,000 men per day are dying on the Russian side. But I just don't know what source to believe because there's no accurate objective figures.
Could the Russians recruit 35,000 new volunteers to fight in the Russian army every month if they were taking the losses that MI6 insists they're taking? How many times do we have to be lied to by the British? I mean, we have been manipulated by the British since 1916, 17. We've never gotten through it. We continue to be manipulated by the British in London. If anything, the Ukraine project has become increasingly an MI6 project supported by London. I think, again, Donald Trump knows this privately. The question for him as an American president is, how do you get out of this? And I think he'd like to get out. Just as he once made it very clear to me and others, he wants to get our troops out of Iraq, out of Syria. He ultimately wanted to get us out of Germany. I think inwardly, Donald Trump is the same way. The other thing is, and something that nobody's paying attention to, is that Donald Trump is turning increasingly to the serious problems we have in the United States. That's why he sent the National Guard and, federal marshals and others into Washington, D.C. The crime statistics that are published publicly are nonsense. It's much worse. And he knows that. He's also privately ashamed, as many Americans are like me, that our capital is such a disgrace. It is a disgrace. And somebody said, well, there are fewer rapes and murders and thefts and assaults. I said, look, first of all, I don't believe that. Secondly, one murder, one rape, one assault in Washington, D.C. is too many. Washington, D.C., and I remember it because I'm old enough now, was a place that in 1960 you could walk from one end to the other without fear of anything. That's how bad it is. So I see him turning inwardly. He's turning inwardly because he's got enormous problems with criminality. He's got enormous problems with finding ways to create employment. He's got problems with millions and millions of illegal aliens that he has to find a way to deport. It's overwhelming. And so he's looking at what's going on in Ukraine. And truthfully, that war is over. It's lost. Ukrainians are being annihilated. Each passing day, it gets worse. So what do? What's the answer? Do you go in and demand a ceasefire? Come on. That's absurd. It's not going to happen.
So then how could he get out of Ukraine, though?
Oh, it's very simple. He could have gotten out months ago. He could have said exactly what he did when he was running for office. And that was, first of all, I didn't start this and I don't want it. I want to normalize relations with Russia. I want to do business with Russia. And we have no interest in this war in Ukraine whatsoever. He did not create the design, the strategy for Russia. The strategy for Russia from the moment this began, you got to go all the way back to 2014, go back to the coup and Victoria Nuland and the gang and CIA and MI6 that engineered that. Everything was designed not for Ukraine's benefit. Nobody gave a damn about Ukraine. Ukraine was being weaponized. It was being turned into a battering ram for use against Russia. And it's failed. It's failed miserably. It's killed 1.8 million Ukrainian soldiers. For God's sakes, think about those numbers. They're horrendous. That's World War I level of destruction and damage. You can't survive that. And the Ukrainian nation may not survive this. That's how really bad it is. So he wants to end this. There's no doubt in my mind. But how do you walk in and do anything other than say, look, I want this to end. I've done everything I can, but I can't end it on my own. My allies want this war. Well, the Europeans don't want the war, but the governments in London, the government in Paris and Berlin, they seem to want the war. I do not want the war. So I'm going to withdraw everybody because there's no point in having any Americans on the ground in Ukraine. There's no point in pouring any more money into Ukraine. We can't win this. This is over. The Europeans, of course, are afraid of that because they know that if we walk out, they're on their own, which is where they belong. They should be on their own. And it's not going to last long once they are on their own.
But if NATO, I think we both agree that NATO played a key role in where we are today in the war in the first place. So if the US played a role in that war through multiple presidents, I wouldn't pinpoint one president, happened since the 90s. If that's the case, then isn't the US responsible to clean up the mess or support Ukraine to a certain extent? And if so, to what level should the US support Ukraine? If we consider US responsible to some extent to the war in Ukraine.
The United States should provide as much as it can, whenever it can, through third countries, humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. That makes sense. I support that 100%. I would support that for Iraq, another place that we destroyed. We have got to get out of the business of destroying other people's countries. And that's what we've done in Ukraine. We did it in Iraq. But I'm not interested in keeping this war on life support in perpetuity just to satisfy the Europeans. And I don't think President Trump is either. Now, can he do that? Can he walk out of this and say, we had some very good talks, very good exchanges of views. And we did agree that we could potentially discuss future arrangements on nuclear weapons, because I know that President Trump is very sensitive to the nuclear issue. And that's something that I think he wants to pursue. He wants to put the nuclear genie, if you will, back into the bottle. A lot of people around him don't, but he does. I also think that President Trump wants to focus at home on the very serious issues that we confront as Americans inside our own society. So I think his inclination is to say, look, I've done all that I can do. I think this war should end, and I'm doing what I can to end it. And that means that we are getting ourselves out. We Americans are leaving because we want to do business with Russia. We want to normalize relations with Russia. We will provide humanitarian aid and assistance to the Ukrainians to the best of our ability. But if the Ukrainian government refuses to talk to Putin and discuss an end to this war, a legitimate end to the war based on realities that the battlefield has now created, then there's nothing we can do. And you're worried about NATO as being dead man walking for years. I mean,
what about the base? But what about the base in Romania? Could negotiations include some, maybe removal of equipment or missile defense systems near the Russian border as part of a deal to give up less Ukrainian territory. So I think, like, if you look at Crimea, Donbass, I just struggle to see them still part of Ukraine after these negotiations. But maybe for Russia to pull out from some of the territory in Kherson and Zaporizhia. And then what would the US and NATO would do is maybe cancel or pause or reduce the size of the Romanian NATO base, which is going to be the biggest base in Europe, and move away some of their equipment and missile defense systems near the Russian border.
Well, if you're a Russian, I'm sure that would be music to your ears. But I think the Russians know that we're on the road to national bankruptcy. And as a result, we'll probably pull these things out anyway. Once we're broke financially, completely, once we can no